Today is Christmas Eve. It's also Hanukkah. And in a certain sense, these two holidays are defined by very formative stories that guide and direct many of our lives. We have a huge Christmas tree downstairs, a product of having been deprived of Christmas trees since I was a little child. When Blanche and I got together, the very first year we got a Christmas tree, we had no decorations, so we popped popcorn and got cranberries and created huge strings around the tree, and it was really a beautiful, beautiful tree. We continue that tradition because it's such a joyous celebration. Yesterday we decorated the tree with my grandchildren, and it was an exquisite moment. It was so beautiful that it was almost tearful because of the exquisite knowing that everything that arrives is already passing. There's such an important need to celebrate every moment. Of course, our Christmas tree is surrounded on all sides by these Buddhas, one big Buddha and one big Tanka, Tibetan Tanka. So we kind of bring in all the traditions, or a lot of the traditions, into this family, and sort of celebrate all of the religious, spiritual teachings of the day. We are really governed by stories. And I've talked about this a lot over time. I'm a storyteller. I'm a purveyor of happy endings. Every movie I've ever written makes you feel some kind of closure, some sense of life is good, I can go on. It's hopeful. And I really have always loved how story informs and shapes our existence. Every story that we know in our life has good guys and bad guys. You don't have stories without that. Just good guys without adversity, meaning something coming to destabilize, have no culminating cathartic moment. Without something creating separation, loss, grief, or suffering, what does it mean to come back to a new level of stability, harmony, equilibrium? So we celebrate that journey. That is the journey that we are all watching in our lives. We watch so much television, every television show, every movie that we go to, every opera, every song we listen to stimulates a part of the story. And what we all want, in a way, is closure. We want affirmation. We want assurance from the collective mind that we're all in this together, that we're all okay, that we're all, in a sense, safe, if not in the immediate moment, in some ultimate sense. We are all well, and will be well in the future. When I was a little kid, I was fascinated by and terrified by what we then called the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. The kind of horror show of suffering that went on worldwide. I couldn't understand it. We used to have a church near us, run by a guy named Father Coughlin, who turned out to be a very dark force in religious circles. Very much a kind of fascist in America, and his church was right down the road from us in Detroit. And we would drive by his church, and I would see an image of a man hanging on a cross. I was Jewish, so I didn't know what I was looking at or why I would see that, but I just went, what? What? What is that? I was born in the middle of a war, probably one of the greatest wars ever, called the Great War, World War II, defined by a very dark, evil force known as the Nazi German, Hitler-led fascist movement. Other dark forces came into play right around that time as well, a little beforehand, the Soviet Union and a very repressive regime. And of course, as I grew up, I started seeing all of these forces. And what I was marveling at as I grew up was the level of safety I experienced living in America. The incredible safety of our world, of 1950s America, if you will, even though it had all these problems with conformity and all of these issues that people would talk about. The man in the gray flannel suit was part of our culture, you know, and we had this exquisite kind of expansive quality. People were working, people were employed and building homes, and the Eisenhower expanded the road system in America, and there was a lot of growth and development and movement, and people had cars and houses, and it was really exquisite, wonderful. And you know, when we said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, it was like we were lucky people. And that luck seemed to have emerged from the darkness, and it was like a new light that would take over and expand forever. And then, of course, all these things happened. You know, when I was in my 20s, Kennedy was shot, and I went, that didn't make sense. That happened in the 1800s. It didn't happen in my time, but it was the beginning of a signal that everything was not right in Camelot, if you will. Things were different. And then, of course, I've watched all of the elections and struggles in the American experience over the last 70-some years. And I was aware of struggle. I was aware of different opinions in the world, reshaping the world, and that those opinions have been pulling further and further apart into polarities, which did not feel good or healthy. And in the middle of all of this worldwide dynamic, and I talked about this last week in my class, I took this LSD trip, and it went poof, and it shattered everything. Logic, meaning, direction, purpose. It completely exploded me into a world in which nothing was what we thought it was. Nothing was real in the way we imagined. All stories fell apart. And the only story that cohered for me was the story of the mystical experience, the journey into the unknowable, the unnameable truth of being. And I discovered at that point in time the underpinnings of Jewish mysticism, Christian mysticism, and of course Hinduism and Buddhism and their teachings. And I was very informed by it, and I felt I had joined a new club. I have joined a club that explains the larger cosmic universe that we all inhabit. And then, 6 years ago, this awakening took place that was very unexpected, and I've described this multiple times, which is that the Bruce that was growing and learning and attaining and getting it all and understanding it all evaporated or disappeared. Just, there was no one to know this. There was only the knowing. There was only that which was known. And there was an immediate sense of arrival, of great awareness, expanded consciousness, and a new sense of having awakened to truth. And then I discovered that that truth was not static, but expansive, non-dual, as they say, incorporating the good and the bad, the high and the low, the in and the out. It was totality. But it kept unfolding in ways that I didn't realize would take place. And it continues to this moment. And I say all this, which I think is repeating a lot of what I said last week, but to describe this week, because what's going on is kind of explosive, slow motion explosion, if you will, to the point of the absolute undermining and destruction, if you will, of every story that gives meaning and coherence to our life. So that there is an arrival at a kind of massive loss of everything that has been known. It is so indescribably other that it's hard to share with anyone. And I have despaired in a way that I have not been able to find anyone who could just go, yeah, because this is so beyond sharing in a way. On the other hand, these talks are a kind of desire to share with all of you. I don't know why exactly, but I have found myself absent of every support system, every nourishment, everything that gave grounding to the life we're living. And it began with a kind of despairing, because I was no longer in the club of the non-dualists, the club of the unknown knowable, the knowable unknown. I was no longer in a place that had meaning of any nature whatsoever. And I really thought, why am I teaching? Why am I sitting here with you guys? What am I sharing? How can I perpetuate the story when I no longer sense there's a story to be told? What is there really to be shared in this situation? And in a way, much of this was instituted by this bizarre election that we just had. And I've talked about it a little bit. But what feels like it is arising is what I used to fear in the experience of reading about the Dark Ages, the Inquisition, the rise of fascism in the world, and all of these other dictatorial systems, the awareness that I grew into slowly over the fact that these awful realities have played out continually in many continents of the world, Africa and South America being particularly inundated by dark forces. And it was like the curtain was being pulled away, because the real bastion of hope in my own limited mind was the American story. And suddenly that story seems to be changing. I don't know where it's going. None of us know where it's going, and it maybe will be fine. Maybe the structures of this country are strong enough to hold us really into a place of ongoing hope and potential. I would love to think that's true. But the great value of what's taken place is the explosion of expecting any of it. The absolute understanding that the world as we know it may have changed in some fundamental way, and that my children and grandchildren and all of you may be inundated by a kind of dark force that I would wish not to have happen. On the other hand, there is within this light and dark polarity a space in which both of these dynamic forces are playing out. And I want to talk about that space for a moment because it's kind of all I have left, in a way. In a good way. Good. It feels good. And that is I have come to embrace one thing that seems knowable. And that is, in the vast chaos of existence, in the powerful explosion of light and dark, good and evil, happy, sad, all dualities, and the explosion of all of that into manifested form. In the chaos of the universe, something unbelievable and real has occurred. And the word for it for me right now is coherence. That somehow all of the incoherent forces of existence have come into this very instant of being, right now, here and now. It is all we know. Take away every story, take away every myth, take away every belief system. We have within our grasp, at this instant, the truth of the coherence of this moment. And the miracle of coherence is so extraordinary, it is almost impossible to grasp. It cannot be grasped. But the fact that out of nothing became something, and in that something, which was wildly incoherent, this coherence formed. And it doesn't form for long. It doesn't hold together for long. It is always falling apart, and yet it is always reconstituting. Until it doesn't, I suppose. But right now, it is cohering. And what's happening in this coherence is extraordinary, at the level of miraculous. Out of incoherent matter is something that does matter, which is us. I cannot tell you what our journey is about, or why it's happening, what it's heading toward, why it came about. I have to say, the biggest thing that's going on for me right now is, what is this? What is this? I have no clue. I walk down the street all day, I just walk and walk, and I go, what is this? And every story that I get, I go, no, it is not the story. It is not the story. It is not knowable, but it is holding together for this moment for some reason. unexplainable. And that holding together is extraordinary. And within it, in this very moment of being, is something that I feel called love, profound love, which seems to be getting bigger by the day, and an appreciation of beauty, which is expanding, so that I walk down the street and stop in my tracks over and over and over again to go, oh. And then my grandchildren come over, and I sit with them and I stare at them. They must get so uncomfortable with how I stare at them, because I go, what is this? What is this life force? What is this beauty, this innocence, this openness, this potential for exploration, this thing that feels so alive and grateful for life, and has some sense of a journey ahead of it, even though we all know that journey only ends in one place, which is the end of a journey, or at least the journey of coherence, as we know it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe coherence remains infinitely. But at some point, everything we know, everything we feel, everything we experience is gone from this realm of life. We have teachings and philosophies and theories about what happens, but it's all teachings and philosophy and theory. The only truth is this coherent moment. And this coherent moment is occurring in the midst of what could be a surrounding darkness, but I can only tell you surrounding darkness has always been there. It may be encroaching upon us, but it has always been encroaching upon us. That the finality of existence has a dark tinge to it. Maybe not. That's where you create your story. I've always created happy endings. I've always created light at the end of the tunnel. I've always created some sense that there is something greater beyond. Every film I've ever done supports those ideas. But I don't know that any of that's true. But I do know in this extraordinary moment of our life together, what is true is when I sit in this space with you, a fountain or fire hydrant of love comes pouring forth. It cares for you beyond anything I could ever expect or understand or believe possible. It loves you. It also knows you. Working with you today, sitting with you, there was this feeling that came up of each of you quietly, privately saying, you can't possibly know what I'm going through or what my life is. And the voice that came inside me said, oh yes, I do. I know exactly what you're going through. I know exactly what you're living through. Not only do I know it, it is my life as well as your life. It is our collective life. And it is a hard life. It is hard to be a piece of being caught between coherence and incoherence. It is really hard to be that. And I know how hard it is for you because I know how hard it is for me. It's even hard for my grandchildren, and they're just little beings just beginning to experience this unknowable reality that we all inhabit, this profound unknowable space that cannot be explained in any way other than through story and myth. And here we are today celebrating one of the great stories, the Christian story and the Jewish story about Hanukkah, and 8 Nights of Light. Who cares about 8 Nights of Light? But I understand why it's all about light trying to inform the world, trying to give us a belief system, trying to make us feel hopeful for some heavenly realm to follow. I've given up on all those stories. They've completely disappeared from me. And I really am walking around with this huge, huge question. What is this? What, existentially, is this? And I have no answer, and therefore probably should not be sitting here trying to teach you what it is, because I really, honestly, truly do not know what it is. I do know that every story that you've heard to give you comfort and sustenance isn't true. Or may be true, but we don't know that it's true. But I do know that we are sitting in this room, in this exquisite world that we have somehow shaped, with sunrises and sunsets and skies and clouds and ground and trees and grass and each other. And we have these moments of unbelievable connectivity where we share and know one another in a remarkable way. And we know that there is this thing called love. We don't get a lot of it, perhaps, or maybe we do. I know that in my awakening, I experienced this thing called presence, which had a quality of love in it that seems to be pervasive. But everything I try to project into the future is a story. Everything I see from behind me in the past is a story. The only truth is present tense, and I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to make of it. But I know I am grateful that it is holding together for this moment. It is a miracle that it coheres, that it is coherent, that the chaos that surrounds us, that maybe is the background noise of everything, is not at this moment operating in a can't find the word, destructive way. It is, I mean, it's tearing us apart at the same time that it's putting us together. What is that? What is this thing that's forming us and taking us apart simultaneously? What is the answer to that? So I am in an existential crisis, if you will. Let me put it this way. I wake up in the middle of the night going, what? What? And then sun rises. I look out the window. I take a shower, brush my teeth. It makes a kind of sense. It makes a kind of sense. I think there are teachers out there who will give you a belief that this ends in some particular way. But whatever that is, it will be a projection in the future. The only thing I can do is bring your attention back to this, because it's the only thing I know to be true, and the only thing you know to be true. This is it. This is it. Everything else is conjecture and incoherent. But this itness gives it truth. It gives it reality. It gives it meaning, matter. I don't know what it means, but it has meaning in it. It has vitality in it. It has beauty in it. It has horror in it and ugliness in it. It has destruction and creation in it. It's all right there now. And it has some kind of structure that we can actually operate in. We can actually go to the store and buy food. We can actually touch another person and go, hi. Wow. Wow. That's what this is. That's all we know, period. The exquisite thing about a class like this, or a class that I used to take with Rudy or with other people, was that there was a fountain of love moving in two directions that was as good as it gets. That fountain works for me with people outside of the class. One of the great gifts for me is I can walk down the street and feel it for the person passing me by on the sidewalk. I feel it for my grandchildren, for my wife, for my children, and for you. And I feel it in the moment. Occasionally I can sit back and feel it even though you're not here. But that's also in the moment. So all I have to say is kind of what I'm saying right now. I don't know anything but this. Period. Why you would want to sit and be present to hear that again, I don't know, except for every utterance of coherence, every moment of shared love, every experience of connectivity is the miracle of existence. It is the living, walking, breathing miracle. And yes, it's all going to be taken away. And yes, it could get ugly. And yes, there could be suffering. And yes, we may deal with all of that. I have no clue. I mean, it doesn't look good, but this moment, this coherent moment, has exquisite beauty in it. And I would kind of guess, moment to moment, even in the darkest ones, that beauty is what animates it. That we are lucky, I feel lucky, to have this. You know, I've said this to you, I contemplate every week not doing this anymore. I just contemplate it continually. It's like, what for? But the what for keeps coming back to the fact that you guys show up. And so I figure, if you show up, I'll show up. And if you don't show up, I won't show up. It's all okay, one way or the other. And I have to say, at the worst of the worst, it's all okay. I know some of us feel real suffering, ongoing, deep, profound suffering. Most people wouldn't trade that suffering for the choices that take you out of suffering. Life is still so exquisite, even in its known suffering, that the abandonment of life itself doesn't seem like a great option. My experience in meditative life and psychedelic life from the old days was that there is no end to any of it. So that trying to take yourself out of life doesn't solve anything. The only solution to anything is to witness the miracle of what is. That's probably the final teaching. Witness the miracle of what is. This coherent expression of living, breathing, sun rising, sun setting amazement that life represents. That's kind of it. And you know me, I can go on and on and on and say this in 500 different ways, but it's the one final real statement. This is a miracle. You are one with that miracle. Excuse me. This is your coherent moment, however it came about, who knows? Whatever will happen to it, who knows? Living in what will be will create, well, at a certain age it's hopeful, at a certain other age it's fearful, but it's unknowable. And the knowable, this knowable is, I would venture to say it's worth it. I mean, I'm sure there are days where it doesn't feel that way. But I'm lucky enough to have these little life forms around me that reinforce the joy. But without that, I would have to say, well, then what? And again, I can only go back to my walks. I walk down the street, and my eyes go, and I see beauty. I just see beauty. And I go, okay, that's what it is. So, I can project nothing about the future, next week, next minute. The past is totally uninteresting to me. This is it. This is the real moment. This is what we're living for. It is what life is. And I say thank you for it all. Any questions?
Well, I guess we're all trying to figure out how to adjust and, have a mantra, trust life, trust the universe, trust God, and everything. This is God. And yes, every story doesn't have a happy ending, but there's always something that comes out of it that changes you or shifts you. And so I have found, like, I'm trying to be one with what's happening in this country and the world, because one person is going to change the world. And if I walk through life and, I've got my head and my heart and my gut, and I go, okay, knock out the head, your guts aren't comfortable, and your head can do this stuff. But if I just go through life and it's a more powerful resolve to live from my heart. I don't care what my head says or my gut's what they're doing. I think most people are being woken up, like, oh, we can have our little life, but now we're all being challenged and asked by life to step up and actually maybe do things to help, even if and living from your heart. And I just find, I used to always do that, and now it's at another level. And
yeah.
I was going to ask you a question about when you see people and energy and things. Have you ever seen death in whatever form that is? And in your own near-death brushes with death this year, is there anything that's come out of that for you that you can sit and go?
Well, first of all, I love what you just said, because I think what you're arriving at is the journey each of us has to take on our own, that no teacher can take you there or put you there or get you there, that what's happening now, which is the blessing of what's happening in the world, is that we're all being thrust upon our own reserves, if you will, or our own inner nature, to find out what do we do now. And it's personal, it's individual, and yet collectively we can reinforce something in each other in this journey that we're on, because it's important. I think the idea of doing something is a great idea if you can find what needs to be done, but don't take doing before being. Finding the being that can open to and respond to and be available to the what is of life is essential before you go in to try to act on it, because I've been around people now who are beginning to act out of hysteria and fear. That is not healthy. Yeah, but there are people who are operating, as you put it, from up here or from down here, and make peace with the what is, and then if that leads to action, which it can, right action, go for it. Because that could be what we're all being called to do. But don't go there out of fear and hysteria. Go there out of, thy will be done, and I am part of thy will. That's really important. As for death, and I'm not exactly sure why you're asking that specifically, I have been around people who have died. I've held hands with people as they've died, and I guess the thing that hits me more than anything is the peace of it, the sudden letting go, the giving over to this inevitable thing. I have not been around people screaming and yelling and all of that. I just haven't been there. In the movies I see something that I get a sense of, which is there is something that takes place. I've talked about this before. This is a funny way to look at it maybe, but when I was a kid in Nepal, I was with a group of guys and we decided to kill 2 little baby goats and have them for dinner. And we were not expert at how to do this. And we very badly cut off the head of one of the goats, and it freaked out. And then, and we were really upset about it, really upset. And we asked one of the passing Nepalese guys to come over and help us with the other one. And he cut off the head, and the body fell over here, and the head fell over here. And the body was shaking and shaking and shaking, and the eyes were spinning around, and all of a sudden the separate eyes went like that, like it saw something. And the minute that happened, the body, 3 feet away, stopped shaking. The connection, something happened, a kind of peace that took over, a peace that surpasses understanding. Something happened. I saw the same thing with a cow that was being strung up to be killed in a slaughterhouse down the hill from where I used to live in Greece. And I saw when they slit its throat, and this cow went through this very terrifying moment, and then all of a sudden it too its eyes did something, and then I saw, it was incredible, like its soul or spirit leave the body. Like it just left the body. There was this tiny microscopic thing, and the body at that moment went limp. And I realized, oh my God, this cow was grown around a spirit, around a soul, around something, for a reason. And I had been a vegetarian up until that day. And I said, it's to provide me with food or milk. And suddenly there was the food, and the soul was free. I could see it, gone. And the lump of food was left, and I started eating meat immediately afterward. It was a very strange experience, but I understood that there were these things going on, these way beyond my grasp, and I watched people finding and animals, a kind of unexpected peace. Now, there's a story in that. I have not been around people on a battlefield where horror and terror goes on. It may be different. My supposition would be there comes a moment where you finally truly surrender, and that you are taken in. That's my instinctual sense of things. I don't know any of it to be true. I have no idea. My own spiritual death on psychedelics back in the 1960s was that it was a 3 or 4 billion year journey into finally saying, okay, that I fought every step of the way, that it was hellish, it was terrifying. They dismantled every idea and thought I ever had about what I was and who I was and what life was. I cried at the loss of every element of it until finally I couldn't do any more. It was like they took the last piece away, and it was like, it was done. It was just done. Enough. Finished. Enough. And that was exquisite. And I entered timeless, infinite space. There was no I, there was only this. There was only whatever it was. And it was beautiful. Not even beautiful. It just was. It just was. So I believe in that. I mean, I really believe in the infinite, and I really believe in the eternal. Is it a story? I don't know. Could it be blackout nothing? It doesn't feel like that, based on what this life has taught me. But I think we're all on a huge journey, whether it adds up or whether it subtracts or whether it means something or doesn't mean something. I can't tell you. But I will tell you, right in this very moment, the love, the connectivity, the beauty, the miracle feels meaningful in and of itself. It's made a very big journey into being. Infinite time and space has found a way into material being. What is that? Why is that? And what are we in that? Those are the major questions of being, and any answer you give yourself will be untrue because it will be you knowing it, and there is no you to know it. So, here we are, death and life, endlessly interwoven, forever, probably, whatever forever is. We are in it. We're looking for release from pain, some kind of solace, some kind of assurance. The most we can do is hug, massage, acupuncture, a few pills, trying to find a way to stay alert and alive in the middle of all of this without doping yourself into unconsciousness, without blowing your brains out, without whatever you're trying to do, pleasuring yourself into endless joy, which can't happen. There's something in the middle. Buddha called it middle path. We're all on that path, every one of us. Some aware of the being on the path, others blindly moving around, some with an inner direction and a kind of a guidance system operating, some totally misguided and flailing through every moment of their life. There's so many variabilities. Some people holding on to stories of a future heaven and joy. Some people terrified that they don't know what moment-to-moment life means or is about. The only thing we have as a group is that something has called our attention and told us that which is around you and outside you and formed and manifested is impermanent and will fall away. So if you make your future and your security based on the thing which is going to go away, it's not going to be very secure or very satisfying. There is a thing called stillness that's within us. And something has alerted all of us to that fact. And as you start to go inward into these spaces of stillness, you start to discover there's a universe inside you. Whether that universe is better than or more permanent than the one outside, I can't say, but I will tell you the world within us has a kind of pathway to something that feels beyond everything the world would ever tell us. A kind of truth and knowing and feeling, a kind of being that is in and of itself so big, so powerful, so real that it dwarfs everything that happens outside us. So learning to go inward seems to be worth it. And so that's why we sit here, and I know when I sit and get very quiet inside, the expansion, the dynamic, the vitality, the bigness of it hits me very quickly. You know, it doesn't provide answers. It just says, I am this, or I am that. Whatever that means. And I, you know, one would like as a teacher to give finality and completion and clarity and absolutism to everything I say. I can't do that to anything. All I can say, sit still. I have that little sign downstairs in the house. It says, be still and know that I am. That's about as big as it gets. Okay? Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy taking a next breath. Enjoy your life. Enjoy your day. And thank you for showing up. Lots of love.